Holy, I'm a sweaty boy. Whew. What is it? It's almost 4 o'clock, October 31st. I got 4 o'clock this morning. Got Sarah to the airport, and I hit the ferry and raced to the mainland, and now I am up in the coastal mountains where I probably feel the most at home in my entire existence. In my mountains here. And I guess this be what you might call my first actual day of deer hunting. And what I do is I already know all the game trails and migration routes of the deer down this valley, both valleys, both ways, north and south. And I'll put a lot of trail cameras at various points along the migration route to where I know the big bucks will come through, where I know they'll hang out, and where I know they'll hang out at certain times of the year. Right now, there's nothing. There's nothing. Like if somebody was an experienced hunter and they came here and saw that I was putting trail cameras down, they'd be like, what are you doing? There isn't even a pile of crap here. But there will be. I don't see a lot of deer here, but the quality is unbelievable. Nobody ever seems to hunt my spots except me for about 20 years. It's pretty cool. A lot of work. I am so sweaty. Man, it sucks. You know, when I used to live here, all I did was run around these mountains. It has in such wicked shape all year round, but I don't have these mountains to just go jump into 20 minutes from home and run around anymore. But this is day one of my deer hunting month. So my goal right now is to harvest the biggest, oldest frickin' mule deer I can find, the biggest, oldest, fattest white-tailed deer I can find, and then at the end I hope to find and harvest a massive old black-tailed buck. I'm going for the trifecta. I almost did it last year, but I missed a huge whitetail, otherwise I would have done it last year. That was a phenomenal season, so we'll see what happens this year. What else? The timber right behind me, that hill behind me. There's an old mountain bike trail that cuts through that timbered hill behind me, about midway up. And basically right on that hill behind me is where a couple guys saw and ran into what they thought at first was the biggest football player they'd ever seen in a gray hoodie. Then they realized he was not a hoodie, it was gray hair from head to toe, and he's about 10 feet tall, booking it uphill. So there you go. So if you go that way, about, I don't know, another kilometer and a bit, you go into Garibaldi Park. And that's where Rene DeHinden went all the time, right? As he was trying to kill one of these monkeys back in the day. Never happened for him. There you go, that's what I'm doing. I'm finally done. I'm very sweaty. Holy. That was a lot of hiking. Now, I'm gonna sit here for a bit, and after I'm done this, go down to my old place, my old friends, and hang out, have a few beers and BS, and I'll show you some grizzly bears that showed up in the yard, my old place, just the other day at after school time. And you'll see the after work traffic in the background. Unbelievable. We're at my buddy's yard, 2 grizzlies. I hope I remember to put that video in here. Now here's a friend, Tom Fish, who takes care and manages my blacktail deer hunting page on Facebook. The title is Tom Fish with a follow-up. Hi Steve, you recently read one of my encounters, and I mentioned that my dad and I had seen one of these woods people, so here it is. My dad, 67 at the time, who is a Vietnam veteran, Marine Corps, and I had hunted in southwest Washington State for 30 years when we had our first sighting in 2012. We were hunting the late muzzleloader season for elk during the last week of November or early December, and it was a Wednesday as I recall. My dad was driving us back to camp for a bite to eat around noon. He was driving my Chevy Tahoe, and I was riding shotgun down a rural 2-lane highway with very light traffic that day. Maybe one vehicle every 5 to 10 minutes. We were traveling around 35 miles per hour around a sharp corner. When out of the corner of my eye, I caught a large, dark-colored object only about 15 feet off the roadway on my side, right on the corner. I didn't think much of it as there are free-range cattle in the area, and my instant thought was a cow was waiting to cross the road, although it would have been a very tall cow. Less than 100 yards up the road, my dad slammed on the brakes while looking in the driver's side mirror and excitedly said, "What in the hell is that?" My dad explained to me he saw a very tall, upright, dark brown, hairy figure cross the highway behind us. He said it made it across the highway in 3 strides. Its arms were swinging down past its knees as it crossed, he said. I asked him where, and he said, on the corner. I mentioned to him that I caught a dark figure out of the corner of my eye when we went by. We turned around, and he drove back to the corner, parked on the side of the road in a pullout, and we got out to look for tracks in the gravel and the dirt on the sides of the highway, where, whatever it was, it crossed, but we found nothing, nor did we smell anything. We then both attempted to cross the highway, taking the longest strides we possibly could, and neither of us could make it across in less than 7 or 8 strides. After doing some research on the subject, there have been other documented sightings close by. I have before and since had several encounters, or at least possible encounters, in the area since the late 80s. I believe I may be marked or tagged by them. So far I've felt safe though. Take care, Steve. Good luck on your upcoming hunt chasing the other ghosts of the woods, the black-tailed deer. Tom, thanks, man. I wish you a lot of good luck too, buddy. And there you go. 2 more men enter the club of no return. No escape. I wonder how many other people seen things around there that are on this channel. Here's another one. Close Encounters, the title of this email. Steve, I pray this email finds you well. My name is Frank, and I just cannot possibly say thank you enough for giving folks like me a place to open up about what we have seen and experienced, and how, in a lot of cases, has altered how we live. A month or so back, you read an email I sent in about an experience I had on my hunting property in North Florida. In the beginning of the email, I said I was 7 feet from one that was distracted on another occasion. I would like to explain how that happened. And to be honest, that is the most I've ever said about this encounter until today. If it was not for your channel, this encounter would have gone to the grave with me. I live in a very rural part of west central Florida. Most folks think Florida is all beaches, but on the west coast from Pasco County, through the Big Bend area, no beaches. Just swamps and rivers that run through swamps, lots of springs and wildlife. I had an area I was allowed to hunt feral pigs and pass through to get to the inshore fishing areas where the fishing is incredible. The area is fairly large, not by BC standard, but for rural Florida. 8 to 10 miles north and south, 3 to 5 miles from the road that runs north and south to the Gulf of Mexico. There's a large spring out there with lots of vents creating several nice watering holes. Back in the late 50s to early 60s, mosquito control would dig small canals and drains back in these spring areas to drain off water that would pond and help control the biting little bastards. They also created berms through the swamp that I used to navigate through. These berms are always close to the vents, so all the game used them as well to get to the watering holes. In the spring and early summer, I would go through and cut the limbs back and keep a clear path so I could walk through in the dark very quietly. At each watering hole there were reeds, and in some cases cattails even grew. The hogs would feed all night, then go to the watering holes in the early morning and drink just as the sun was coming up, then bed down in the heat of day. If the wind was blowing from the west and the ground was slightly damp, which in October it always is, you could use the reeds and the west wind to your advantage and pick up some pork chops on your way out to catch some redfish. Redneck surf and turf, smoked redfish, then fresh pork shoulder. Central Florida style, hell yeah. I'm sure you've heard it before, hunting in Alabama, but when a hog drinks, it does not drink like a dog with its tongue. It puts its snout in the water and sucks the water in with a slurping sound. This particular morning I was approaching the far west watering hole. This hole is too brackish to drink out of unless the tide is out, and it was. The sun was not up yet, but it was getting a little light out, and I was able to slip up to the east side of those reeds silently, with the west wind in my face. I could hear the hog sucking up the water, and I was absolutely on top of him, and he had no idea I was there. I had a stainless Smith & Wesson 41 mag, and I was getting ready to ring his bell. I slipped around the south face of the reeds without making a sound, looked north of the watering hole, gun drawn, and saw it was a dude. It was dark behind the reeds, but you could clearly make out the guy was huge. He had his face right in the spring water. His hands were on the ground in front of the hole, and his feet were down in the water. At that point, I was not able to make out this huge dude. This huge dude was covered by short black hair. I dropped the gun down to my side. When I did, this thing rotated his body to look left. He did not hardly turn his head, but he rotated left and lifted his body right up with his arms, and his arms were long, and I could see then they had hair all over them. He was so big that even in the crouched position, his head was not much below mine, and I got a fairly clear look at the left side of his face. The hair on his head was not that long, maybe an inch and a half. His left ear was like a human ear, just with very short hair. His nose was flatter, and his mouth was gaping open a bit with upper and lower canines. They were fairly small for his size. I did not have time nor enough daylight to get any more exact details, and the water was still dripping off of his face. We were staring at each other for about 2 seconds. I'm not sure how he did it, but this dude sprang out of the hole and flew about 7 feet to the south, landed on the other side of the berm, and took off running on all fours for about 30 or so feet. Then in a smooth motion, came up on 2 feet and ran out of my sight south into the thick swamp. All that happened in about 5 or 6 seconds. He was gone. I was shaking. I could not move for some time, and I'm not exactly sure how long, but it was a minute or two. I ran west as hard as I could. I thought if I had to fight this thing, I wanted to do it on open ground, not in the swamp. The rest of the details of the day are not really that important. There was no way I was walking back to my truck through that swamp. I ended up hiking to the Gulf and flagged down a net boat that gave me a ride to the little fishing town to the north, and I hitched a ride to my truck. I went through that swamp 3 to 4 times a month for a few years before this happened, but I did not go back there after that. People may think I'm crazy, but I still think about that experience daily. It scared me to the point that I cannot remember a lot of the day after that happened. I just want to say this. I've heard you read a few emails lately about shooting these things, and others talking about how human they are, and I can tell you this. This guy was a dude of some sort. If he was shot because we've not figured out what they are, it would be murder in my opinion. It could have killed me too quick to talk about. And that is not where his head was. He was hunting and gathering just like me and just wanted to be left alone. Thank you, Steve. God bless you and all you do. And God bless you and all you do too, my man. What an eye-opener, huh? What a frickin' eye-opener. Appreciate your honesty, man. Really super appreciate the time you just donated of your life to everybody here to write and send that email. I know it's a pain in the butt. Who's next? It's funny, I always got a bit of pressure behind me. Always have, facing this side of the valley, because I just don't go up here. I know, it's weird. It's like almost I got a weird feeling. You guys are on that side of the valley. I'm in the bottom on that side. We just leave each other alone. I still look behind me though. I don't know why. I probably shouldn't. Georgia Bigfoot sighting in 1995. How's it going, Steve? My name is Jason Grasso. I'm 36 years old and I live in North County, San Diego. I've had a lifelong passion for hunting in the outdoors ever since the first hunting trip my uncle took me on in North Carolina when I was 10 years old. Before I get into my story, I want to send my sincere condolences for your horse, Macaroni. I know firsthand how hard it is to go through losing a best friend, animal or human. The bond we create with our pets is truly unique. They only show us unconditional love and friendship no matter what, and you're very lucky to have him in your life. He'll always be with you, and thank you for letting us get to know him a little by having him in your videos. Thanks, man. Having said that, I'll get into my encounter/sightings that I've had with these things that all took place in North Carolina and Georgia. I apologize in advance if it seems like I'm rambling on, but I feel the best way for everyone to truly understand and experience what I went through is to lay out all the details so they can feel like they were right there with me. Growing up, my family and I would always travel about an hour north of Atlanta. It's my grandma's horse ranch that was located in Marietta, Georgia, for our yearly 2-week Christmas vacation. On the trip that I was 10 years old was when my parents felt that I was old enough to go hunting with my Uncle Andy in North Carolina for a dove on a huge piece of private property his friend's family owned. I don't want to give any specifics of where the property is located, out of respect for my uncle's friend who owns it, and also so none of these fake research groups and so-called intimidators show up and make a circus out of it. I can tell you that it's in the southeastern part of North Carolina, and once you get off the interstate, you drive for a good while into the middle of nowhere until you hit a private dirt road with a locked gate. There isn't a spot of land on that side of the states that isn't taken over by thick, green forest that go on forever, unless it's someone's property who has purposely cleared out the forest. The house is in the middle of the property and has about 200 yards of cleared pasture in front and on both sides of the house. And the back side was about 40 yards cleared before the wilderness starts again and has a duck pond back there. So it's easy to imagine that anything could be out there, which I learned on the second day we were there. After we unpacked on the first day, we still had a few hours of daylight left, so my uncle gave me my first hunting and shooting lessons, going over all the do's and don'ts of handling a firearm while hunting and letting me get accustomed to handling and shooting a 12-gauge semi-auto Beretta. After a semi-successful dove hunt, the next morning I asked my uncle if I could take the Beretta out with me while I explored around the duck pond behind the house, which he agreed to, but only after he tested me on what I learned the day before about safety and all that. An hour into my exploration, I wandered a good half a mile away from the house, shooting at every squirrel, rabbit, and object that looked like it needed to be killed, just like most 10-year-old boys would. And I found an almost completely dry creek bed that I could walk in because it went back towards the direction of the house. I remember the forest being alive all day long, hearing all the birds, the bugs, the squirrels making their sounds, which I became accustomed to. Then I heard a squirrel close by making a loud and repetitive sound that to me was kind of like a car alarm, which was the first thing I thought was odd because none of the squirrels that I had shot at or killed from earlier that day had made this sound. Then I took aim at it while it was running up the tree and realized that every couple of branches it would stop and look back towards my direction but not down at me. It was looking behind me down the creek from where I had just come from, and as soon as it reached the upper canopy, it disappeared in the thick green foliage, and then everything went completely silent as if Mother Nature hit the mute button. I could only hear the low sound of the water in the creek I was in, and it was at that moment that a feeling of dread and panic came over me, and my hands and legs started to twitch uncontrollably. At the same time, it was like I knew I was being watched, just like when you catch someone staring at you, but this was accompanied by what I can only explain as something like an inner voice in my head telling me to leave because I am trespassing and something really bad is about to happen. Even though I was only 10 years old and scared shitless by what at that point I thought only be some sort of animal like a cougar or bear, I remembered learning to never turn your back and run from a predator. I knew I needed to turn and face it and slowly back away with my gun at the ready and keep my eyes on it until I was safe. So I turned around, and at the spot where I entered the creek, there's an old tree that had fallen down across the creek bed, and there was a bunch of debris that had built up along the tree, but there was a gap between two branches about 4 feet off the ground. And I could see up the creek through the branches except for the middle, which had something blocking it, and it moved. I could see some daylight right below the top branch, which I realized was the head of something dark moving like it was crouching down to get below the bottom branch. And as soon as I turned to see this thing move, it froze. And I was to focus and get a good look at, and I could see a dark, hairless face with a wide nose, big black eyes with brownish/reddish hair around the face. I could also see this thing had wrinkles on the outside of its eyes because it was squinting, and its nostrils were so big I could see them moving as if it was smelling the air. The best way to give you a resemblance to something to compare to is the documentary called blank blank blank. Okay, I got it. Somebody on YouTube. At the very end of the documentary, he's on his stomach facing uphill and captured a creature that's looking through the tree stump. When I saw that footage, my heart dropped and I started to feel the same way I did that day. Same dark face, nose, eyes, ears. It's traumatizing just writing this. Back to my encounter, I thought that day that I was looking at the face of a gorilla. So then I started backing sideways so I could easily move my head to see what's in front of me, and back to keep an eye on the thing. After about 20 yards of moving back like that, I knew if I got out of the creek bottom, I could get back to the house quicker, because the creek bottom had rocks of all sizes everywhere, along with mud and all sorts of other things that have fallen in there. This whole time, it was still looking through the gap because my head was on a swivel, and I think it had been watching me for some time and knew what a gun was. But in order to get out of the creek, I needed both hands. So I slid/tossed the shotgun up the bank, looked back to make sure it was still there, and then turned and climbed up the bank and got to the top in a few seconds. Grabbed the shotgun, got to my feet, and looked back down the creek, and now the gap between the branches was open. And I turned and ran as fast as I could until I heard what sounded like a hellish scream/yell that shocked me inside and out and reverberated through my chest like I was riding in a car with a $10,000 sound system behind my seat. I never saw or heard anything again on that trip. That day for me opened my eyes to a young age that there is so much more about this earth and beyond that we don't know yet. I know what I saw. I feel that if it wanted to, I would not be here to tell my story. I've never told my uncle about what happened, and he thinks I was in the state I was in when I got back because I was up to no good out in the woods. There are only a few people who have heard my story, but now it's for everyone. I've had some other experiences on the same piece of land, and one in Georgia that I will email soon. And I apologize for the lengthy story and any grammatical errors, but have never told this story with the written word. And keep up the fight, Steve. You made it possible for those who have been scared and afraid to tell their story in a safe place with people who have been through it too. With numbers and having each other's back, we become stronger with each day, and the truth will no longer be hidden and manipulated by those assholes. Thank you. Jason, thank you. You're a brave man. And you know now you're not alone. And we appreciate you getting that shared out, man. This place is nothing without people like you, all right? This place is nothing. Terrifying for a kid, huh? Kids need to know the truth before they go in the woods. This is titled Bigfoot. Hi, Steve. I haven't shared this story with many people, but you can use my name if you like. I don't really understand it myself until I watched your videos and heard the screams these people make. And that's what I heard in the forest around 1986 around Flagstaff, Arizona. About me, I grew up in Avon Lake, Ohio. Born in '57. Good year for Chevy cars. I loved to be in the woods. Voted most likely to live in a cave by my classmates. I moved to Arizona in '78. I didn't get into big game hunting until '82. Whitetail, mule deer, and elk. I was an avid bow hunter, and like you, I always used a bear brand bow. I always hunted around the beautiful forest around the San Francisco Peaks and the north rim of the Grand Canyon. It was '86. I was drawn for my first elk hunt in the San Francisco Peaks, which at the time was the best elk hunting in the country. That day I arrived at camp, unpacked and set up the tent and gathered firewood for the night. It was dark by that time, and I was just getting ready to light the fire when I heard a voice sound. This scared the shit out of me. Not from a man, but from something else. When I get scared, I mean really scared. My ears will pull back like a dog. It must be instinct. It was very dark and the forest was thick. It was about 35 yards away from me and was pissed off, screaming and yelling, pacing back and forth. Couldn't see anything. My flashlight was not very good. Not thinking of turning on my truck lights, this continued for 35 minutes. I was frozen in fear. When I was able to move again, I ripped up the tent and gear and threw it in my truck and got the hell out of there. I still hunted the area, but never alone. I'm a pussy, right? LOL. No, you're not. Thanks for listening. Sorry for the grammar. I'm not much of a writer. Thanks, Steve, for your channel. Brian McGrath. Brian? I'm sorry if I didn't read it smooth. I'm usually the guilty party. It was written great. Excuse me. What do we got here? I can feel pressure here. I always feel pressure here. You can hear traffic way down the valley. just travels right up the slopes. But they don't seem like it, but I always fight the urge to just sit here with my back to the side here. I won't wimp out yet. It's titled Weird Encounter. Hi Steve, keep up the good work. I look forward to seeing your videos. Back about 20 years ago, I used to collect the stories people told me about their paranormal experiences. One such story came from a guy I worked with at the Defense Intelligence Agency. This staff sergeant named Carl had, like all of us there, a top secret security clearance and thus could be relied upon not to be a BS artist. I wrote up a story and put it on a website I used to have long ago, and this is it. Quote, the weather was dark and gloomy up that day in southeastern Ohio with occasional squalls of rain. Still, Carl left the cabin, rifle in hand, and headed into the woods to hunt deer. His uncle had decided to stay behind, so Carl was alone. Selecting an ambush site, he sat quietly, keeping as still as possible. And after a while, Carl heard the distinctive sound of footsteps approaching him from behind. He knew they were from a person and not an animal, since he was raised in the country and spent his life as an outdoorsman. He could easily tell the difference. Turning his head to the side, Carl called out, "Uncle?" But what he then saw out of the corner of his eye was not his uncle. In fact, it wasn't even human. What he saw was a glowing, sort of greenish-yellow cloud about the size of a man. Alarmed, Carl quickly got to his feet and turned around to confront the specter. But whatever it was, it had simply disappeared. Looking around, he could see far into the woods, but to his amazement, there was no sign of the thing. Nor were there any tracks. Confused and uneasy, Carl returned to the cabin where he met his uncle sitting at the table eating. Since his uncle was wearing a yellow rain slicker, Carl asked whether he had been out in the woods, and his uncle replied that he hadn't left the cabin yet that day. And Carl has no idea what it was he saw that day in '79, although he's quite certain he saw it. Whether this thing is a Bigfoot or not is unknown. Gaseous-looking clouds, however, don't normally make the noise of someone walking in the woods. On the other hand, there are credible reports of Bigfoot shape-shifting into orbs and cloaking themselves to be invisible. In any case, I think they are interdimensional creatures appearing from time to time in our reality. This may have been one. Regards, Thomas Wolk. You can use my name if you so decide to use this. Got it, man. Appreciate you, Thomas. Who's seen that description? Anybody? Throw it down in the comment section below, right, if you have. There's nothing new about seeing something like that. Not now. Not now. Appreciate you, man. This next one is titled "It Walked Right Past Us." Hi Steve, I'm 38 years old from Wales in the UK, and this happened when I was 21. So, in about 2003, a friend and I had been traveling around the US, and we went to Seattle because we were both fans of the grunge music scene. We only had a couple of days left in the area, and we wanted to see some of the countryside, so we drove to Olympic National Park. I don't know the exact location, as we just found a place to park. Oh. My helicopter buddies. Remember when I'd film here all the time? It's almost like every time. Helicopter, right? It's gonna come right over top of me. You see the guy in the window. Right from the ski hill up the valley. Excuse me. Noisy buggers, huh? I don't know the exact location, as we just found a place to park, saw a trail, and started walking. We turned up this trail that had a creek running by the left-hand side, and the trail gradually went uphill as the slope down to the creek got higher and steeper. After maybe a couple of miles of gradual incline, the trail got rather steep, but then plateaued, and there was an abrupt turn right at the top that created like a blind corner. We stopped at the top of the hill to catch our breath. I was standing with my back to the way we came, and my friend was standing in front and to my right, facing the way we just came. We stood there for what seemed like maybe a few minutes, and then I noticed my friend was just standing there with his mouth open, staring at something behind me. I said, "What is it? What's wrong?" I was expecting him to say it was a bear or something. Then he just nodded, motioning with his head to look behind me. Right out of a horror movie, right? Just as I was turning to look behind me, this great big mass brushed past me and walked off ahead of us. Whoa. Obviously, I nearly jumped out of my skin and said, "What the F?" It took me a second to realize what I was seeing. It took a few steps away from us, turned its shoulders as it was walking, and grunted, looking right at us. The only impression I got was to just look away. So I'm standing there looking at the ground with my eyes wide open, thinking this dude does not want me to look at him. I couldn't help it, and I looked up again. After a few seconds, it turned and looked at me again like it knew I was looking at it. And this time he gave us a bigger grunt, and it literally rattled my rib cage. So I'm standing there staring at the ground again, trying to keep it in my peripheral vision. It walked maybe another 50 feet up the trail from us, got to the tree line, and pretty much disappeared into thin air. My friend just stood there with his mouth open the whole time like he was in shock. We immediately headed back down the trail and got the hell out of there. I've had a long time to think this over, and there's definitely some things that don't make sense to me. Like, why didn't we see, hear, or smell anything on the way up to that spot? We didn't hear any footsteps behind us. It was as if it was just there all of a sudden. There was no real sense of fear. I mean, it shocked me when it brushed past me because I wasn't expecting it, and I literally could have reached out and touched the thing. But it was as if it didn't give a shit that we were there. It just didn't want us looking. As when it grunted at me, that was the only time I really felt a sense of fear or danger. It also felt strangely like a dream, and I got the impression that it was the creature that was doing this somehow. And as for the description, well, I'm a big guy. I'm 6'6" and over 300 pounds. When this thing walked past me, I turned to look at it. My head was about halfway up its upper arm. So it was a whole head and shoulders taller than me. So it must have been like 8.5 to 9 feet tall. One of the weirdest things was that it was blonde. A big mass of raggy, dirty, blonde hair with dark gray, almost black skin underneath it. The face is almost hairless. The hair was on the head, and like a blonde beard that connected to its body hair. The eyes are brown, almost black, the face is really weathered, and he looked thoroughly pissed off. Like I said, almost didn't seem to give a shit we were there. There's a reason why I called him dude earlier, because that's the impression I got from this thing. Like he was some pissed off old dude living in the woods and just wants to be left alone. Anyway, that's my experience. Like I said, it still kind of feels like a dream. It hasn't really affected me adversely, maybe because I was always interested in paranormal stuff and whatnot anyway. But my friend was and still is the staunch skeptic type. He absolutely refuses to talk about it, and it has affected our relationship to the point that we don't speak much anymore. I think seeing that thing just totally destroyed his worldview, and he refuses to accept it. Anyway, thanks, Steve. Keep up the good work, Dave. Holy shit. Gotta admit, that's a holy shitter. Right? That's a holy shit. Light colored with almost black skin, that's a common description. brushing right by a couple of guys in the trail. That's not common, right? Anyway, I'm gonna get out of here. The light's getting lower. I might try out my Starlink with the truck down the road in an open area and see if I can load this down there, maybe. Have a snack. Put on some dry clothes. Then maybe I'll walk into this timber behind me and I'll show you guys what the timber looks like in here. You wanna do that? Oh, and then maybe at the end I'll hope I'll remember to put my buddy's grizzly bears in the backyard video on the end of this so you can see them. Let's go have a look in this timber for the hell of it, shall we? Go face the pressure, right? Just sliding up the tripod so I don't bang it on the ground. 1 second. 2 more. 1 more. There we go. Let's have a look. Oh, mossy moss, lichen, mossy rocks, hanging lichen, old timber, dark. Timbered for miles. If you go straight shot that way, you end up at Harrison. And you all heard about Harrison Lake, British Columbia, right? And I can see why I like bow hunting in this country. It's silent, thick. You can still see a ways, right? Rocky bluffs. It's easy to ambush and sneak up on animals in this timber with this kind of terrain. It just goes like this forever. Easy to be concealed, right? There you go. This is what's behind me. Forever. There you go. I'm out of here. Should be able to come back tomorrow and do this again, maybe somewhere, as I start my 2-day journey north. Probably tomorrow late. And then and carry on and see if I can smash my 3 goals. See you guys later.
Hey, what are you two doing here? You should not have 2 grizzly bears sitting in my yard here. Not good, boys. Not good.